Brzenk versus Irakli Zirakashvili was one of the most nail-biting back-and-forth arm wrestling matches in East versus West history. Both pullers were forced into using awkward techniques they would never use on purpose. This match came down to the unrivaled experience of Brzenk versus the heart of Irakli Zirakashvili. In this video, we're going to analyze the technical flow of this match. We're going to look at many of the subtle changes made by Irakli Zirakashvili that, although difficult to notice, made a huge difference in the outcome of this match. Let's begin. Going into this match, we have Brzenk, who we know can pull in pretty much any style that he wants to. He can hook, he can press, he can top roll, he can do everything. And up until this point, Irakli Zirakashvili is basically just a really solid low-hand top roller. We know that he has one of the strongest elbow flexors, one of the strongest biceps, if not the strongest bicep in this league in the weight class. But he hasn't really done a lot of other stuff. We've seen him having trouble versus people like Todd Hutchings, who he was able to go through his arm even though he had hand control, and he's also had trouble with people going over the top of him. So in this match, off of the go, we see Irakli try to do the same thing that he always does. He's trying to top roll, he's trying to go outside. But he has an issue here, and it's with Brzenk top rolling versus his top roll and going right back over the top of him. So what's happening here is that Irakli Zirakashvili is the one that is holding on to John. We always hear Devin Larratt talk about how you should never be the one holding on to your opponents, and essentially what that means is that if slippage occurs in the match, who is this going to benefit? You can see how Irakli does not have great finger coverage around the back of John's hand, so as he drags his elbow back while he's trying to pin here as he's applying down pressure, this is forcing him to hold on to John's top roll. John is simply applying a static up pressure through his thumb, and John is okay with his wrist going back. Even if John's wrist goes back, he can still pull just fine, he can still top roll through his thumb, but Irakli doesn't really have this ability, so he is being forced to hold on to John, and you can see every single time that he drives down toward the pin pad, his wrist starts to crack back. So sure, he's taking John's wrist too, but he's also losing his own wrist, and he doesn't really have the ability to pull from here very effectively. So at this point in the match right here, everything is looking really good for Brzenk. Irakli's stock has gone way down, because once he's lost his wrist, the match is pretty much over. Irakli does not have a backup move. All that he has is his classic low-hand top roll. But then, this moment right here happens. Irakli tries to transition into a flop press, and initially, this just looks like a terrible desperation move. You can tell that John is way out onto his fingertips. There's no way that Irakli is going to have anything from here, and if anything, this just boosted John's stock even more so. And as we see, Irakli just intentionally fouls way off the front of the pad just to try to get a restart here, so things are looking really good for Brzenk. Now on the restart of round 1, we see the exact same thing, only this time Irakli loses his hand even worse, even sooner. He's a bit more explosive, and once again John is controlling who is holding on to who. Irakli is the one holding on to John's top roll, and it's not looking good for him. He really doesn't have any kind of access to attacking John's fingertips in a way that's going to lead to a victory, and that's because John is the one controlling the high ground. We see Irakli try to go into a hook for just a second there, he rolls back out, and once again we see him attempting to transition to the flop press. But this time, things are very different. In the very first round, if you remember, Irakli was way outside of his shoulder, and really he wasn't pushing, he wasn't pressing, but he was still pulling. This time things are very different, as Irakli's shoulder is lined up with his elbow and his hand. He has a really strong angle to push right into John's bicep, and this is very different. Irakli is all the way over the top, he has connection to his shoulder, and he has isolated John's bicep. Not only has he isolated the bicep, but he is defeating the radial deviation. John's wrist rise is beginning to drop, and Irakli manages to just barely pin John in this round. So now everything has changed. At first it looked like Irakli was totally finished and the flop press was a complete desperation move, but now we've seen that it actually can do some real damage. And Irakli has now set the stage for the entirety of the rest of the super match. He is going to open in an outside move, open in a top roll, and then at some point when he feels that he is able to, he's going to transition to that flop press to isolate John's bicep. And this means that the battle of efficiency is now heavily swinging in Irakli's favor, because Irakli has two distinct moves that he can use that use opposing muscle groups, whereas John really only has one move that he can use, and the more that his bicep gets tired out, the worse it's going to be for him. On the ready go of round 2, we see the same thing. Irakli opens in that outside move, but this time he probably transitions to the press too early, and you can see once again that now he is not inside his shoulder, he is not able to press, he's not able to push, but instead he's still just pulling with a flop wrist position. He does not have any kind of bone line connection here, he is still using musculature at this point, and this is not a good position for Irakli. He fouls to get the restart. Now in the restart of round 2, we see the same thing, but this time Irakli is going to wait a little bit longer. He's going to try to go through that elbow flexor of John Brzenk more so in an outside move before transitioning to the flop press. So he does more surges trying to get through the elbow flexor, but this time he doesn't end up controlling the transition to the flop press. He is actually forced there by John Brzenk, and once again you can see that he is way outside of his shoulder line. This is not an efficient position, this is not a good position for Irakli. He does not have the ability to isolate John's bicep, and John just transitions there for the easy pin as Irakli forfeits, knowing that he's just going to gas out from there. Going into the start of round 3, this match is now totally on. Both guys have potential to win this match. They have potential lanes that can cause the other one a lot of issues. This time, Irakli pretty much goes into that flop press right on the go. Irakli's hand is totally blown out at this point. And once again, you can see he can't really isolate John's bicep. He's trying to get his shoulder committed, but John just has too much shoulder commitment of his own. And Irakli once again concedes this round, knowing that he hasn't really hit the spot he needs to be in. And at this point, John is leading 2-1, and it looks like he has found an answer for Irakli's flop press. But this round is where everything is going to change. We're going to see something totally new from Irakli. In the past, Irakli has been fighting on the offensive, and whenever he gets in a bad position, he just surrenders the rounds. But this time, you can see that he allows John to go to the winning side of the table, and he tries to get John to finish the match. And notice what happens as John stands up to press. John is in total control of the high ground, but as he begins to bring his shoulder forward, Irakli is putting a tremendous amount of upward pressure through his thumb. And you can actually see that John's wrist begins to crack back a little bit. John is no longer going through the bicep of Irakli to finish, but now all of the pressure is going into John's fingertips, and he can tell that if he tries to press as hard as he can, he's going to lose his wrist, he's going to flop his own wrist back, so he transitions back into an outside move from this position, and this gives Irakli access to John's bicep once again. John is gassing out, and Irakli is able to get the pin in this lane. And now we can see that once John is actually forced to finish the match in a press, this is going to be a lot easier said than done, and Irakli has yet another counter for that move as well. And the last round is probably the craziest of all of them. At this point, Irakli's hand is so gone he can't even challenge outside, and he just dives in there trying to isolate John's bicep right from the beginning of the match, and he does a pretty good job of getting there. John is stuck on his bicep, he can't quite finish the match from here. Irakli is getting close to a pin here, but he's still not really inside his shoulder lane. He's still in this super awkward side pressure lane where he doesn't have connection to his bone line. You see him trying to edge his shoulder forward and get more and more inside, but he just can't quite get there as John's elbow flexor is still holding on. At this point in the match, we see John trying to commit his own elbow flexor, trying to initiate with a press of his own to get Irakli outside his shoulder, and John just needs to get off of his bicep at this point. And this moment right here is when John transitions to the press, but this is an extremely awkward position to press from. And notice how even though Irakli is flop pressing, what happens is he actually ends up top rolling John Brzenk from a flop press. This is a super unique position. This does not happen very often, but you can see that Irakli is in this flop press. John goes down to the pad, but then he begins to lose his wrist. And you can see from this alternative angle that Irakli is actually rolling back out. And you can see that there's a huge amount of up pressure because John lifts his elbow significantly up off the pad, although this is not called. So in the blink of an eye, Irakli goes from a flop press where he's trying to put down pressure all the way back into a top roll through his thumb without his wrist where he's putting straight up pressure, and this begins to crack John Brzenk's wrist back, and John has to go back to a different move. And from here, John is once again back onto his elbow flexor, and Irakli is able to fully commit his shoulder now. You can see that his shoulder, his elbow, and his hand all make a line, and now he has full access to all that pressing power, and he's able to press through John's arm and get the win 3-2. If Irakli Zirakashvili had not made this super quick transition right there, where he goes from an inside move to an outside move in the blink of an eye, Brzenk would have pressed him to the pad. This was a genius move from Irakli, and it ended up leading to his victory. Now, a lot of people have said that Brzenk only lost this match because he gassed out, and this is partially true, but one thing we have to remember is that the reason John gassed out is because Irakli was using multiple different moves and he just refused to give up in this match. So clearly John was not at his best by the time that round 5 came along, but I think that we have to give credit where credit is due, and in this match, credit is clearly due to Irakli Zirakashvili.